From the European Parliament here in Brussels, this is Raw Politics. Thank you for joining us tonight, and this is what we have for you on the menu. The big Brexit pile-on. A UK plan faces fire from all sides. Tony Blair's take, what the former Prime Minister thinks of Theresa May. Germany's identity crisis. Is the government doing enough to quell the extreme right? We have that for you as well. And Europe's new hero, has Bono finally found what he's looking for? And here in Brussels, back to school, politics style. Well, welcome to Raw Politics, a new nightly show where we promise to hear all views, all voices, and really delve into what's happening across Europe. And we'll hear from people of all political persuasions. Now, sometimes it might get uncomfortable, but we will be unapologetically impartial. And the most important people, of course, that we need to hear from is you. What do you care about? How do you feel about the EU? What are you talking about at home over dinner? Now, do get in touch with us on Twitter at Euronews with the hashtag Raw Politics. And now let us get right into it. Let us meet the panel that we have tonight. So I have Darren McCaffrey, our political editor on Euronews, joining us tonight. Darren, of all the stories I just read out earlier, which ones interest you?
Well, I think Tesa, it has to be that Brexit is back. You know, despite the briefest of respites during the summer, it is the story that we cannot get away from. And probably rightly so, because we are into the final phase, possibly, or we should be at least, of these negotiations. It's a crucial moment for the United Kingdom, but also for the rest of the European Union.
Indeed, the clock is ticking. And we have with us Esther Zallan from the EU Observer. You specialize in Brexit and populism. Which of these stories got your attention?
Well, it's exciting to be back to school, and politicians and politics is returning to Brussels. And with the European elections coming up next May, I think it will be an exciting and decisive moment.
All right. And what about you? We have Quentin Ariès. You write for the Washington Post, a freelance journalist here in Brussels. Which story is really standing out for you?
Germany. Like between the protests in Eastern Germany and the upcoming regional elections in Bavaria, like those key moments will determine the migration policy of Europe for the European elections and for the years to come.
Indeed, migration, Brexit, all of these very important topics, and we'll talk about all of that. But first, let's get into our top story. Summer is over, and it's really back to reality. And here in Brussels, as well as across the Channel, it is looking like a crushing reality for Brexit. Now, just days after a surge of optimism, negotiations continued in Brussels today, while over in London, UK Prime Minister Theresa May is now facing criticism from almost all sides of the debate. Former Foreign Minister Boris Johnson says that May is entering negotiations with Brussels with a white flag fluttering. Now, Downing Street fired back, saying Johnson offers no new ideas, in fact. And meanwhile, in Europe's chief negotiator, Michel Barnier, he said that he strongly opposes May's plan. We also have Tony Blair weighing into the debate. We'll hear from him later. But first, let's talk about the latest developments. I mean, Darren, we saw last week Michel Barnier, I bring him up, the chief negotiator. He struck an optimistic tone last week. And today, again, the hard talk. What is going on here?
I think last week, in some ways, this was a misinterpretation of actually what was being said. Michel Barnier talked about a close partnership, the closest possible relationship. That, of course, is the objective of both sides in this negotiation. And Emmanuel Macron's kind of comments were taken out of context. But ultimately, yeah, there is a bit of a reality crash today. There is a constant reminder that the Conservative Party is riven by divide and by essentially the two different sides in this debate tearing the Conservative Party apart, and Theresa May somewhat stuck in the middle, almost like the woman in the middle of the road, almost being knocked down by either side. And also a reminder from the European Union, from Michel Barnier, that the main proposal from the UK government, the Chequers proposal, is just simply not acceptable. So what was 7 weeks to go to that EU summit? There is still so little sign that a deal is possible.
No, absolutely. And you bring up Emmanuel Macron's comments as well, because he seemed to say that, OK, we might be willing to compromise after all that rhetoric. Kanta, I would like to pose that question to you, because, you know, the markets reacted last week. They were quite happy about those comments. So what is this? Is this somewhat like a power play between Barnier and Macron? Barnier saying, actually, look, I am the negotiator here.
But actually, Macron last week didn't say a single new thing. Like the idea of several circles in Europe has been like there have been a lot of papers by think tankers, European Parliament and so on. There have been a lot of discussions already. The question is, within those circles, you still need to have some rules. You still need to have some EU law, you still need to have the ECJ, because like the most extended circle will be the single market eventually. And after the hour, you can get to Schengen, the euro, and maybe other things. And but still, you need to have the common rules. And right now, on the Chequers plan, is still trying to break this circle and try to create a new circle, which is kind of weird.
It's almost like same idea, just different name.
I think last week was essentially it was August.
All right.
And it needed a story, whereas this week actually it's back,
it's a real thing.
It's back to what we all know.
All right.
I think it's also important to point out that May's Chequers plan is mostly about the future, but the EU is focusing on the withdrawal agreement. And I think the Barnier's comments is an increase in pressure to get down to business and agree to the divorce deal. That's the first to go.
All right, I'd like to bring up actually a couple of quotes for everyone. So here, Michel Barnier saying, but if we let the British pick the raisins out of our rules, that would have serious consequences. Then all sorts of other third countries could insist that we offer them the same benefits. That is Michel Barnier. And then we have Boris Johnson saying, we will remain in the EU taxi, but this time locked in the boot with absolutely no say on the destination. That's quite a description. I mean, surely these two opinions, it's like butting heads. Is there any room for compromise here? Darren, I'll put that to you.
Well, Boris is a great wordsmith in many ways, but the problem, and Downing Street flagged this up today, is where is the alternative proposal? So Brexiteers have had since the start of this summer, when they all went out and slated Theresa May's Chequers proposal, to come up with an alternative. Now, we're told that this possibly might be about to happen over the next coming weeks, potentially timed for that crucial Conservative Party conference at the start of October. But the question is, even if they do come up with an alternative, will Europe buy it? Probably not. Will the rest of the Conservative Party buy it? Possibly, but again, possibly not. So, and yet, we're more than 2 years into these negotiations. You know, this was meant to be agreed, the withdrawal treaty, at the end of October. It's now looking likely that that is going to be pushed back to November. It's what Michel Barnier said yesterday. There is even the possibility that we may well see an extension of Article 50 if Europe allows it. So the bizarre thing in these negotiations is these have not yet been negotiations in some regards between London and Brussels. There are still negotiations between what Britain's negotiating position is in London.
Indeed, and surely something's got to give. Esther, I was just reading one of your articles. You said that actually now in Brexit negotiations there are even more deal breakers. So which one of those deal breakers is the biggest one for you?
Well, definitely the biggest one is the Irish border issue. I mean, that's a conundrum that's very difficult to solve because Theresa May will have to break one of her promises that she either made to Northern Ireland's party, to her Conservatives, or the EU. So she will have to move somewhere, and that's very difficult to do for her politically. And I think the EU has been aware of her difficult political situation back home. So the Chequers plan was played down by Barnier back in July, but in a lot more diplomatic and softer tone. So I think the change in language is also saying to May, you have to decide.
Sure, and someone else is weighing into this debate. It's former Prime Minister Tony Blair. I did speak to him, and this is what he said. I began by asking him about what he thinks of Theresa May.
The whole problem with Theresa May's proposals that she's released is that I think they're the least favourite option of the British people. I think a lot of people want to remain, like me, and certainly significant numbers of people want to go, like Boris Johnson and David Davis and all these people. I think people either want to stay or go.
So have you discussed this with her, with Theresa May? You talked to David Cameron back then. Do you discuss this with Theresa May and give your view?
I haven't discussed it with her, and frankly, I don't think there'd be a meeting of minds. What she thinks, and by the way, she is well-intentioned in thinking this. She's trying to do her best for the country. What she thinks is, look, we have to do Brexit. Okay, it's not a good idea, but we have to do it. And therefore, I'm going to do the mildest version of Brexit we can in order to say to the people who voted Brexit, we've done it, and protect the economy. Okay, it's totally sensible at one level. The trouble is, in doing that, she's neither going to satisfy the people who really want Brexit, nor the people who think the whole thing's a bad idea. So it looks like a clever compromise, but actually it's a compromise that is the worst of both worlds and will satisfy nobody.
Right.
Which is why, by the way, I don't think it'll pass the House of Commons. I think Parliament will vote that down in the end.
Having said that, on a scale of 1 to 10, how do you think she's doing then?
Well, I don't sort of offer marks like that because I just think she's on the wrong course altogether. I understand why she's trying to do it, but I think it's doomed to fail.
But do you sympathise with her? You mentioned trying to bring together two very different ways of thinking.
Yeah, no, I completely sympathise with her. But in the end, the trouble is leaders have got to lead. if she thinks it's a bad idea, and I think, she's been asked so many times now, does she think Brexit's going to be good for the country? You'd think if she thought it was, she'd say it. She doesn't think it's a good idea. And there's something truly remarkable about a situation, especially for a country as mature and sort of serious as Britain, to have its leadership, its political class, take the country down a path that collectively they think is a bad idea. So it's a very odd thing. I mean, I've never seen a parallel like it. I can't imagine being Prime Minister and saying to the country, right, I'm going to do this thing, even though I think it's a bad idea, I'm going to do it.
But there was a vote. She's got to do it.
Well, there was a vote, and the vote was to leave the European Union. It was 52 to 48, right? And since that time, we've had different versions of Brexit. We now know a lot more about this issue than we knew back then. We know, for example, some of the claims that were made for Brexit are obviously wrong. So, in the end, there's nothing wrong. It's an odd thing to say the British people should not be able to have a final say once you come to the crunch moment and you're going to leave. And, when I read people saying, there's going to be sort of a revolt of the people if you have another vote. I mean, why? You're giving the people another vote. And by the way, if they then vote to leave, even people like me are going to have to say that's an end of it.
I just want to bring up, a video that's resurfaced earlier from 2005, you talking to Nigel Farage at Parliament. I think that was quite entertaining.
Let me just tell you, sir, and your colleagues, you sit with our country's flag, you do not represent our country's interests.
You said that you told him you don't represent people's interests. Have you completely misjudged this? And are there any other misjudgments you've probably made?
Look, I didn't think the country would vote for Brexit. But I always took the view, when I was Prime Minister, that you had to deal with the real concerns and the legitimate grievances that people had, particularly on the right. Otherwise, you would leave a space for the far right to come and colonise a lot of political territory. So, for example, contrary to what people now say, my government took some very tough measures on immigration, on asylum, law and order. We didn't leave much space for the Farages of this world when I was in office. I think Was
that a mistake?
No, I think we were right to do that, because I think it then put him where he should be, which is on the fringe of British politics.
So he said a lot there. It seems like he cannot wrap his mind or brain around the fact that Theresa May is doing what she's doing. I'll put it to you, Kanta. He said it's doomed to fail. Your thoughts on that?
It's a good question. Obviously, right now, the checkers is not good for the Tory party and not good for the European Union. So, to some extent, yes, it is doomed to fail. The thing right now, you still have some room to maneuver. You will have 3 summits. You will have a summit in Salzburg with EU leaders. You will have a big Brexit summit in October. And this is what actually Barnier really said very interestingly last week, is you will have a new summit in mid-November to wrap up everything. So, they still have the stages more or less correct to more or less have a compromise. I'm not a fortune teller right now, but so I can't say what's going to happen in terms of...
What about you, Darren? What do you think?
Thankfully, none of us, or even those that have tried to be over the last 20 years have got everything wrong. I think when it comes to Tony Blair, the question is to put to him, first of all, people, as you did, Tess, people did have a vote.
Exactly.
If there was another one, what does that make it? 1-1? Is it the best of 3? And it is then the duty, given the fact that Parliament backed this, to carry out that deal. Second of all, clearly some of the claims made on the Leave side during that campaign have not come true or possibly won't. But that is also true of the Remain side. There were lots of suggestions of Project Fear that the UK economy would crash and burn if there was the Brexit vote. And it took a hit, but it certainly didn't to that degree. And the whole point of politics is the art of compromise. And, Tony Blair is meant to be a Democrat. He's meant to be someone who understands how politics works. And politics works is that essentially in a democracy, the public give you an instruction. And yes, you lead, but you lead from what they've told you to do. And whatever you think about Theresa May, and I think most of us probably have sympathy for her to a degree, that is what she is trying to do.
And I think what's interesting, and he brought it up when he was talking about Nigel Farage, the far right. I raised it to him that, he said that this was a fringe opinion, but the fringe opinion actually voted, and this is, they made their voices heard. What do you think of that? When you look at populism, is this a mistake of politicians when they go, oh, this is what we think, and what you think is on the fringe? Is that a mistake?
Well, it's a sort of a mistake. I mean, you have to have an inclusive debate, and a lot of the reasons why these populists are so angry is that because they think they've been left out of the debate. But one interesting aspect is that analysts have showed that it was really part of the rise of UKIP is down to the Labour Party, which was led at that time by Tony Blair, moved to the centre. So it left workers, people in the lower middle class that were not beneficiaries of globalization, they left behind, were not picked up by the Labour, which is a more mainstream party, but were left for the UKIP. So.
Yeah, Derek,
and you just say that actually, I think that Tony Blair, in many ways, or his administration, sowed the seeds actually for Brexit. From 2004, when Britain became, I think, one of 3 European countries to allow, from the very start, the integration of Eastern European migration, led to the largest influx of migrants in British history, and it was politically incorrect to talk about it.
Right.
So many people were feeling this, seeing this, and not being politically reflected that point of view because it was seen as politically incorrect. So maybe unsurprising that, 10 years later, after a financial crash, people who were then allowed to talk to it expressed the view that they didn't quite like it that much, and they didn't quite like Tony Blair's approach.
Absolutely.
When he was Prime Minister.
Indeed. And there was a continuation to that interview. We played a little game, a little word association game there. I threw some names at him and asked him to tell me what came to mind.
We're going to play a quick word game. I'm just going to mention names and you tell me, give me an adjective or whatever comes to mind, all right? Let's start with...
Never do these games well.
Let's start with Nigel Farage.
The past.
Vladimir Putin.
The enigma.
Nice. Theresa May.
Sympathy.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Well, I hope he deals with this, but at the moment, anxiety.
Boris Johnson.
Humour, but...
But. Jean-Claude Juncker.
Affection, actually.
Really?
Yeah. Despite our disagreements, I actually think he has a real integrity about him.
Angela Merkel.
Respect.
Bono, who has commented on Brexit. Bono.
No, friendship.
Friendship. All right, thank you very much, Tony Blair, former British Prime Minister, for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so very quickly, which one was your favourite?
I quite liked what he said about Boris Johnson, but he couldn't quite bring himself to even actually use a word to describe him.
There's a lot of pause there, wasn't there?
I thought for Corbyn he would say no sympathy after May's sympathy.
Juncker is also very interesting because Blair has been in Brussels a couple of times during the Brexit campaign and after to meet with Juncker on one-to-one lunches in the Berlaymont in Brussels, and very hard to know what happened really at those lunches.
Interesting what he had to say. All right, now I'm sure we can all remember the feeling that you've enjoyed after several weeks of holiday fun, but the dreaded day finally arrives and you have no choice but to go back to school. Well, that's perhaps how MEPs are feeling today as they return from their lengthy summer recess and get back down to business. Our correspondent Maeve McMahon hit the playground, or what we call here Place de Luxembourg, to speak to the MEPs as they head back to work. And she started with asking what they did on their summer holiday.
I went to Lake Como for my holiday.
I spent my holidays in Greece as a break. To Spain, on the beach.
Reading, swimming. Oh, very nice. We went to Italy, Germany and France.
Well, I stay in my country all the time, in Poland.
I actually went for 4 days in Miami Beach.
People, police officers, migration officers, border guards have the amount of information they need as quickly as possible.
I work to balance work and life. One of my priorities is to deal with the matter of immigration, which is so much important for Europe and my country as well.
I think we are very concerned about the situation, how we deal with refugees.
The first one obviously is to ensure that I get the Brexit that I campaigned for and that the government does a proper negotiation and doesn't hand too many powers over to the European Union.
Nobody. I would like a new president. I don't have any name.
My political chairman, Manfred Weber here, has announced that he would be interested to run the European Commission after the next elections.
I'm still a fan of Mr. Schulz, also he's not in the parliament right now.
Florent Philippot, it's never here.
You know, if you would just put the whole of UKIP on detention, we won't miss them. They don't do anything here and they're only an annoyance. So
I would like to put Verhofstadt on detention and I join him for a good couple of hours having a negotiation of the way forward for Britain, Europe and the rest of the world. I think that would be fun.
Hey, Esther, you were looking forward to going back to school. You excited about this session of Parliament?
Yes, definitely. And I think it's very telling that most of them mentioned migration as the big issue. I mean, as Kantan said, this is where the big political clashes will happen in the next months.
Yeah, and Darren, welcome to Brussels. What about you?
What
are you looking
my first
forward
day. You
to?
can see the enthusiasm there amongst the MEPs back here. But yeah, it is a pretty crucial time. You know, we've got Brexit, we've got immigration, we've got those elections coming up next year. I mean, it's going to be busy for everyone.
And everything at the same time.
Yes,
so like even
absolutely.
everything will overlap, and it will be very interesting to us.
Interconnected, so the political deals will be
so
made.
much work to do, so much to look forward to. All right, a lot to come on Raw Politics. A thought that needs to become a feeling. That's Bono's love ballad to Europe. And in Germany, competing rallies and the extreme right. What's driving anti-migrant sentiment? That's after a short break. Welcome back to Raw Politics. Now, thousands of people are expected at an anti-racism concert in the German city of Chemnitz tonight. This is after violent clashes between far-right and counter-protesters. Now, on Saturday, an estimated 8,000 demonstrators were on the streets of the East German city, where a state of emergency has now been declared. Unrest erupted after an Iraqi and a Syrian man were arrested over a fatal stabbing last week, and anti-migrant mobs started chasing foreigners in the streets. Now, there have also been reports of far-right protesters performing Nazi salutes. Now, with me to unravel the situation in Germany, our political editor Darren McCaffrey. We have Michael Modrikamen, director of the right-wing group The Movement, and Christian Democrat MEP Peter Jar. Thank you very much for joining us for this panel. I'd like to know, I think you are from close to Chemnitz, isn't that right?
Yes, right.
What is happening there? I was reading in the New York Times that it was described as something that hasn't been seen since the end of the Second World War.
Maybe you have to understand that was a young man was killed by two peoples, and you have what should I say? It was not in the deeply forest. It was not outside of the city. It was downtown. It was in the middle of the city. It was close to the main street, and early in the morning. That's right. But that's why also the people so exciting. And then the police catch two people, and then they realized. One of them was illegal in Germany.
Yeah, we have 8,000 people protesting, and some were seeing Nazi salutes. That's worrying for you as a German?
Because we have different demonstrations. The first was on the Sunday, on the same day. That was should be a silent march. It was not really silence. And then on Sunday we have also different demonstration, right? And to left-wing power. And I had to say that's the one of the big issue that we have. We divided the people to right and left. I think that's not.
Michael, you're from the right. We have to qualify.
But I would like to add, there was, of course, a few Nazi and racist and fascists, and they should be kept out of the streets.
So that worries you?
Yeah, obviously. But beside that, there was a lot of ordinary citizens from Chemnitz that do not accept anymore to see their wife, their daughter, their sister, their mother being harassed, being raped, being chased in the street, plus, murder and
But you're
crime.
making it sound like it's happening all the time.
Yeah, we're to get perspective. There's there were more people, or the same number of people, murdered in Germany last year as Chicago.
That is not true. So there has been an increase. There are official reports.
It's still incredibly safe. Germany is still incredibly safe.
Look, maybe it's still safe, but there has been a sharp increase in crimes, in rapes. And there are official reports from the government attributing clearly this increase to the influx of migrants. And I think that you have a lot of ordinary citizens that say, enough. We want protection, and we want that our government take care of its citizens first.
All right.
This is the message.
Before we continue this discussion, let's put things into context. Joining us from Berlin is Politico's chief Europe correspondent Matthew Karnichnig. Matthew, thanks for joining us today. Can you put this into context for us? What is driving this unrest in Germany?
Well, I think you have to look back over what's happened in the past 3 years in Germany. And I think many of your viewers will probably remember the situation on New Year's Eve in 2015, where you had these attacks on women there near the cathedral in the city of Cologne, which really opened a lot of people's eyes to the fact that, dealing with this refugee influx might not be as easy as a lot of people may have initially thought. And I think what we're seeing in Chemnitz recently is basically a continuation of this. It's a very similar situation where you have a crime that is really a heinous crime. A German citizen is killed, and then you have this reaction to it, this very emotional reaction, given the fact that this last event occurred in the state of Saxony, which has been known as sort of a hotbed for right-wing activity. It's not that surprising, maybe, but you're seeing this sort of unease, I think, across Germany, not just in the East, because you've had a string of these crimes. And even though murder overall seems to be a kind of a minor problem in Germany, you've had a number of high-profile cases recently. In fact, today there was just a verdict in the murder of a 15-year-old girl in southwestern Germany at the hands of a man who's believed to be an Afghan refugee. They haven't been able to positively identify him, and he was sentenced to 8.5 years in prison. And you've had other similar cases. So I think there's sort of this gradual sort of dawning on people that dealing with this refugee influx, especially considering that so many of the refugees are young men, they're not assimilated into society. There's clearly a lot of frustration on their part, because presumably when they came to Germany, they were sort of told it's going to be the land of milk and honey, and they'll get a job and everything will be fine. And that's turned out not to be the case. And obviously, when you take in more than 1 million people, some of them are going to commit crimes. And I think on the part of the German population, or many in the German population, they feel, well, they weren't really asked about whether they wanted this or not. And so you're seeing, these marches, you're seeing obviously the neo-Nazis coming out and so forth. But I think it's important to remember it's not just neo-Nazis who are marching.
All right. Thank you for that. Berlin's Politico's chief Europe correspondent, Matthew Karnichnig, talking to us from Berlin there. I would like you to react to what he was saying there. Let's start with you, Peter.
Well, what should I say? If you look to the statistic, you say Germany, or especially Chemnitz, is very, very safe. That's a statistic. The other things is also feeling by the people. And there is many, we call it petty crime before. And what should I say? In the end, statistic is one side, the feeling is the other side. And that's why also our Prime Minister start the event. He called it Saxony Talk. Listen to the people, understand the people, and make action.
You're talking about statistics. I just want to bring up some statistics, actually, because you were talking about perception and then numbers. So those official statistics show that the number of non-German murder suspects increased between 2016 and 2017 by 33%. But I think it's important to note when we say non-German, it doesn't specify nationality. It could be an EU citizen, so it did not break down the nationality. Now, let's take a look at the number of migrant victims of murder. That's between 2016 and 2017, 60% more migrants were the victims of murder. So to put it all into context, let's bear in mind that in 2017, crime in Germany was at its lowest rate since 1992. It dropped by 5.1% on the previous year. To your point, Darren, that it is still safe in Germany.
Yeah, but there is clearly, let's say there is clearly a problem, at least on a perception level. What does Angela Merkel, what are the governments, the federal government, need to do in Germany to try and deal with that perception that things are getting worse? What's the remedy?
My answer is another way. I would say you can do but the typical German people. You can do everything with him, but at least I'm also a German. He needs law and order. Law and order. And if we have the feeling it will fail, if we have no law and order, then there is confusion. And that's why we have to bring the law and order back to the people, although I would say in his own region, not only in a statistic. If we feel not
just very quickly,
well. That's what I want to say, and that is the risk and the chance.
Sure, very quickly, Michael. Just very quickly, on the perception? Is this what the far right is fueled?
You are not raped or killed by perception. It's facts. Women have been raped, women have been chased.
Sure, but put it into context of statistics.
Maybe Germany is still safe globally, but it was much safer before. So basically,
crime is done.
Yeah.
Crime is done.
I am sorry. There are official reports from the German authorities saying that there's been a sharp increase of rape and harassment industry. Look. This happened. This happened in Chemnitz, and today somebody will be...
How do you deal with it then? How do you deal with it?
Look, first
it's law and order.
Two things. First of all, look, it was so foreseeable that by accepting hundreds of thousands of people, young male people, coming from for some of them, some very backward, environment, where for them, a woman, their sister, should stay home, shouldn't be in the street. That whenever they see all, ordinary German women walking free,
that is rather anecdotal, though.
They see them as target. They see them as prey. This is the problem. This is why we have so many problems.
What's the solution, though?
We will actually. I'm going to get into that because the German Foreign Minister Heiko Maas is calling for the public actually to make a stand against what we're seeing on the street, against extremism. Well, let's head over to Alex Morgan in the Cube, our social media news hub. He has the latest on this part of the story. Alex.
There's only one solution.
Tessa, what perhaps people are referring to is an image that will distress many people in Germany and around the world. Images like this. Let's watch this video. This is from the 27th. It shows a man here standing in front of the march making several Nazi salutes before police walk him off here. But the person who took this footage wants to remain anonymous. They're from a group called the Jewish Forum who monitor anti-Semitic activity across Germany. But they say they weren't actually looking to film this man. They were looking to film the mass of people in the background. We can show you here. Now, they are holding signs and placards which say things like German for the Germans and also foreign is out, chanting no neo-Nazi slogans. We've had our German team listening to what was going on in the background there. But this man himself, seen here making that symbol, that Nazi salute, this footage taken from the 27th from Chemnitz, one of the examples of amongst those who were there were people quite openly in front of the police making the Nazi salute. Then let's go into what a lot of people were holding there. Let's not forget that fake news and false reports do not serve you, whether you're left or right, wherever you stand. It doesn't serve anyone. But there's this. Let's just scroll this down for you. This is an image on a banner by those. One man here holding a Nazi salute. It's a collage of beaten women. The claim here is these women are attacked in Germany by migrants. These women are the victims, in fact, of domestic abuse, police brutality, and other crimes elsewhere in the world. These are not German women, and yet these images have been appropriated, turned into this meme, and spread. This has been fact-checked and debunked by this Austrian site here and their teams of journalists. We're also looking across it ourselves in the Cube, going back to the sources. But these women here, while they were attacked, they were not attacked in Germany, and they were not attacked by migrants. Just an example of some of the misinformation being spread by people here, as you can see, clearly doing the Nazi salute.
All right, thank you for that, Alex. I mean, we're talking here about extremism. So, Darren, to your point, is enough being done in Germany?
Well, this is a big question. Clearly, there is a reality and there is a perception of what the reality is. And a lot of people in Germany are buying at least into what the perception of the reality is. The question, of course, is this just simply a law and order issue? Have the police dealt with it badly and are not dealing with it very well? Or is this a and which it is, a wider political issue for Angela Merkel, that her decision, 3 years ago, has had massive ramifications that she's not been able to deal with.
And this is why you should come back to Raw Politics, because we will be discussing a lot more on this. And we have a lot more to come in the program after the break. When Raw Politics is Jean-Claude Juncker obsessed with time and the Commission President's daylight savings decision. And that's after a short break. Welcome back to Raw Politics. Well, how's this for political timing? Days before MEPs return to Brussels and 2 weeks before the State of the Union, Jean-Claude Juncker has decided to hand some power back to European nations. Well, the power to decide time. Our social media team has been digging into this story and the response to it. Alex Morgan joins us now from the Cube in Lyon. Alex.
What a timely announcement, Tessa, as you were saying. Yes, as everybody's coming back to Brussels, there's the announcement that daylight saving time is going to go. At least that's what the EU Commission is putting forward. Now, there's been a real mix to this. You've got MEPs like Deirdre Clune here saying, yes, brilliant news. She's been campaigning for this for a long time, saying that over 4.5 million people got involved online to give their thoughts about getting rid of it. But then you've got people on the other side, less welcoming of this news. People, let's just bring you up here, like Jean here, saying this whole thing, he published an article in Libération saying the whole thing is a distraction technique. A distraction technique is everyone's coming back to Brussels to get you talking about the time when you should be talking about maybe things like the Brexit, in his words, mess. So you can see there's a real division there. Other people saying, I'm all in favour, like Jonas here, as a professor, saying I'm all in favour of changing the way EU does the time, but let's not get rid of daylight saving time. Let's extend it to the whole year for those summer evenings, in their words. So if you like, they like the principle, but they hate the way the EU's gone about executing it. So there's a real division on these things. Then there's other people like Nick here pointing out that actually, how is this going to affect Ireland if, obviously, Northern Ireland is leaving the European Union, Ireland, the Republic of Ireland, is going to have a different time? Is this going to create what they call Irish border time? And then just finally, some people seeing the funny side of it, if you like Doris Vickers here saying the only way to solve this whole timing fiasco is to give every EU citizen one of these, a sundial. So there you go, that'll be handing back power to local and regional areas. So some people having fun with it, but fair to say, it's got a lot of people talking, Tessa.
For that, Alex and the Cube team. And our panelists from the beginning of the show, they're back. Darren McCaffrey, our political editor at Euronews. Esther Zalan from the EU Observer. And Quentin Ariès, a freelance journalist who writes for the Washington Post. So, distraction. Is it a distraction, Quentin?
I think so. Like right now, what's happening? Like you have the migration crisis. The Commission is unable to provide answers or to deliver on what EU leaders had agreed on migration. Brexit, we still don't know what's going to happen, but also on the Eurozone reform, on the upcoming European elections. So they are trying to be very close to the citizens. But it's kind of very weird what happened when they announced it. Like there was a lot of blur. Like they didn't know what it really meant. They were really surprised actually by the Irish question, even if this is something they should have figured out already. So.
Is there a valid argument to be made though? Because there were, I think, more than 4 million people who joined the survey, 3 million from Germany, and now there's a north-south divide. Is there an actual issue here?
Well, it's a great opportunity for the Commission to say we're listening to the people and we're executing what the people want. So it is a bit of a distraction, but there are apparently studies that say that it's bad for health, the time switches, and actually it doesn't save energy as originally thought.
This is essentially the perennial question, is it? That comes up every couple of years. Should we have the one time? And there are arguments on the other side. They say if you've got extended lights in the winter, in the evening, it saves lives, but then that means it doesn't get light potentially to 9 o'clock. That sundial watch in Brussels, there's no sun at all. It would be impossible to work. Maybe that wouldn't be a bad thing if people couldn't tell the time. Is it a distraction? I don't know if it is. Do people care about it? They probably do, actually, because it does impact on them. Will it make a great deal of difference either way? I'm not entirely sure.
Right.
We're not going to gain an actual hour.
But anyway, it will take months because, by the time the Commission presented, Parliament
it will be the member states.
We'll just have to move on now to our Euro stars because it's actually all about Bono.
It was supposed to be a big weekend for Bono. The U2 frontman was set to launch his European tour in Germany. This just days after he vowed to fly the European flag as he makes his way across the continent. But things aren't going quite to plan for the Irish musician. As thousands of loyal fans gathered in Berlin, U2 cut short the concert after Bono suffered what was described as a complete loss of voice. Bono's enforced silence will come as a disappointment to those who hoped his pro-EU tour would mark the fight back against rising Euroscepticism. Meanwhile, Bono vows to walk on despite his vocal struggles.
So the voice of Europe, he has lost his voice. What do you guys think?
And millions of people cheered in response. I joke. He's Irish. I should support him. I think... I don't know why do popular musicians and actors and stuff get involved in politics? It never really works. No one ever really trusts what they've got to say on it. Does it change public opinion? Almost certainly not. I think they should probably stick to what they do.
It's a very sad metaphor, no? Don't you think? I mean, he wanted to speak pro-EU, pro-Europe.
And couldn't even do that.
It was, a nice op-ed. So, if he wrote it himself, it was actually...
Yeah, that was a very nice... Yeah.
Yeah, do any of these pop stars actually have any influence? You think no? Not at all.
Well, we hear from them all the time. They try to get involved, and it makes no difference. I mean...
It makes it fun, no?
Maybe it does, but no, I think you just go, Bono, just stick to singing.
All right, well, thank you very much for chipping into all of our topics today, and thank you for joining us today on Raw Politics. We'd like to hear your views, of course. What are you talking about over dinner, at home, with your friends? Tell us on Twitter. I'm there, at Tesa Arcilla, or you can follow us on Twitter, at Euronews. Use the hashtag Raw Politics. Have a good evening, and bye for now.